Hey everyone, Dr. Reeschool here, and welcome to this video in which I'm returning to the topic of secondary sources. And today we're talking about how to use them, how to get the most out of them, how to really make them sing and make them work for you. So a key question really that emerges firstly is why bother to use secondary sources in the first place? And so you have your primary source, you have the key piece of material that makes up your argument and makes up sort of the basis of an essay or a piece of work. Why bring in the secondary stuff? Why bring in what other people have written or discussed or analysed about the work? Well, the important thing to remember really when you're doing a academic piece of work is that your ideas do not exist in a vacuum. And good work really understands its place amongst the literature. It's rare that a primary source will have nothing ever written about it or it will never have been discussed. So what you're doing is looking at stuff that already exists and thinking, where do I sit amongst that? And a really effective piece of academic work understands a primary source in its own right, but it understands the primary source in an academic context. That is, what people have said about it, and how people have understood that primary source in its own right. Once you've found a source, it is then a matter of engaging with it effectively. What does that mean? That very much is the question. So, what are the key ideas, the key arguments of a particular source? What is the value of the source? And now, if the source is a journal article or something more academic, it will likely outline the key arguments. It will likely outline the key ideas right from the off. Um, so, make a note of them, right? What is the value of this source? What is it telling me that it's trying to do? And then what examples does it use? If it's analysing a primary source, it will have used some form of example in the process of creating its argument. So what is it using? And then the counterpoint to that is what is it not using? What examples are not there? What things are not contained within the source? And by nature, nothing can contain everything, right? And so there will always be stuff that's not there. Be it for space reasons, be it because the text is doing a particular thing and not another thing. Um, but then to ask yourselves there, sort of a corollary to that question is what is the stance of the author? If the author is writing a book, I don't know, specifically about representation of women, say, in a particular text, they are all probably not going to be talking about representations of other things necessarily, because that's not their argument. If they're doing a Marxist analysis, one concerned with class and economics and stuff, they may not be talking about, say, eco-criticism. So ask yourself, what are the main arguments, but what also is the stance of the author? What is their sort of particular way in to the thing, the primary source that they are analysing and engaging with? One of the best ways to show that you've engaged with a source as well as having understood it is to pull out good quotes, good examples from the source. Now, the question that emerges there logically is what is a good quote? What is a good example? How do you know what are the things that are worth pulling out? And there are multiple ways to think about this. Are there examples, are there quotes that effectively sum up what the source is doing? And if there's a brilliant quote that sort of really captures the argument of a source, that captures the stance of a source, it will likely be a good one. Um, what I would suggest as well is look to the piece of work that you're doing. You will be producing work for a reason. You will have some sort of central argument or some question you're responding to. Are there quotes, examples that are particularly relevant to that? If you're writing an essay on, oh, I don't know, let's say Frankenstein and feminism, say, um, are there quotes in a secondary source you're reading that particularly speak well to notions of feminism, notions of Frankenstein, or some combination of the two? Um, and then you also ask yourself, are there quotes there that you don't quite agree with, that you think are limited, they're saying the wrong thing, that you don't think go far enough? Are there quotes that speak to one example that you think might be relevant to another example? I'm going to come on to this later. But good quotes may be good because they're saying something brilliant, but they may also be good because you think they're missing something or they're not quite going far enough. To build on the previous point, so a question that always tends to emerge is, should you quote a source, or should you paraphrase? What is the difference? Well, a quote is literally that. It's pulling out a particular example and quoting it verbatim. A particular line, a particular word, a particular sort of section of a text. Whereas paraphrasing is you essentially capturing the idea in your own words. Now, there are uses to both. So if there's a particular term you want to argue with, if there's a particular idea that you really want to challenge, quoting can be a really useful way of doing that. If you want to essentially just capture an idea, if you were talking about an entire work, you'd probably paraphrase it rather than go into it in great detail. It's very useful for sort of capturing longer ideas, for capturing bigger parts of a text. But there's nothing inherently right or wrong either way. It's what works particularly best for the point that you are trying to make. And really often it's a judgment call. What you can pull out of a direct quote. Is there something really there of value? And more often than not, the answer is yes. But if you think that a summary does everything you need to do, if you're only using it for context, for example, paraphrasing is a very useful way about that. In this part of the video, while I think the advice here is the thing that really separates sort of the good pieces of work from the sort of the inspired ones, the first class ones, and that is being able to take a critical stance on the secondary critical material. So when you're reading a text, when you're interpreting it, always be asking yourself, do you agree with the argument or do you disagree with it? And why do you think that? Do you read a particular primary source in a different way to what the original source is saying? What your secondary source is saying, sorry. You are very able to argue with sources, and I know sort of a lot of it is a confidence thing, but it might be the case that the source is taking a particular way in, it's using a particular lens that you don't think the best lens. It might be the case that you don't think the examples that it uses are the best examples. It might be the case that you think going into the primary source in a different way is more useful. Alternatively, you might think that this secondary source is the best thing ever. It really says everything that you need to say about the source. So how can you build on it? How can you go further than what's there? Always be asking yourself the question of what you can do that's more, or what the source is not doing. Because essentially, if you agree with the secondary source 100%, then there's no point to your argument. I may as well read the secondary source. So what can you do that's different? What can you do that's in some sense building on or counter to the source? Now, one way of doing this that I think is really useful, and again shows that you have quite a grasp of secondary material, is looking around the thing. Are there other secondary sources that have those different viewpoints? Can you bring them into conversation with each other? If one source says that reading a particular text through the lens of class is the most useful, and then another source says no, it's through the lens of gender, say, can you put those two sources in conversation? Can you make one speak to the other? Where do you sit in between that? It's a challenge, I think, and it's something that comes with time. It really sort of grows as you sort of grow into writing. But this is always what I would think. You're very able to agree 100% with secondary sources, but sort of try and go beyond that. Try and always ask yourself, what's not there? What can I do that's more? And I'm going to do a video sort of addressing this, I think. But always ask yourself sort of, there are always limitations to every primary and secondary source. What are the limitations to the ones I'm using? Lastly, the final key piece of advice on secondary sources is always remember to cite them. Always be referencing. Always be making sure that essentially your readers know where the ideas have come from. Your readers, your viewers, whoever's engaging with your work, they know where the ideas have come from. And so claim your own ideas as your own. But when you're using quotes, when you're paraphrasing, whenever in some sense you're engaging with secondary material, always be citing it. One of the worst traps you can fall into is claiming ideas that are not your own, plagiarising deliberately or accidentally. And it's a very easy thing to forget. And similarly, it's a very easy thing to sort of not do. So just always have that in your head. Have I referenced, have I cited? If I'm quoting ideas, are they my own or have I found them somewhere, and can I give that credit? So there you are. Those are some of my thoughts on how you can unpick and use secondary sources effectively. As I say, it's my intention to do another video that sort of probes this question of arguing, unpicking and finding limitations of the secondary material, which I think is a useful thing, and I think it's quite a hard thing to sort of crack. So I'm going to do a video on that and show some of the questions that I would be asking as I do. Hopefully this has been useful. Anyhow, thank you very much for watching. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, and please do comment below if you have any other advice or thoughts that would be useful, or ideas for a future video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one. Otherwise, thank you very much